Former U.S. Director of National Intelligence Dennis Blair works for Japanese gangsters. Benjamin Fulford, April 14, 2015. Sometimes you have to see things to believe them. Today, I got the name card of Dennis Blair, former U.S. Director of National Intelligence, overseeing all U.S. intelligence agencies, and former Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Pacific Forces. It says he is now Chairman of the Board and CEO of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. In other words, he works for Yohei Sasagawa, a man multiple Japanese Yakuza gangster sources have told this writer is a fellow gangster. Here is a link to a declassified CIA report about his father Ryoki Sasagawa. Here is a quote from a well-researched book about the Yakuza. So there you have it. U.S. top brass retiring into Yakuza fronts. Blair was speaking at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan where he dutifully rolled out the current Washington, D.C. party line for the corporate propaganda press. This writer was repeatedly denied an opportunity to ask Blair a question, so we will post our question here. Mr. Blair, you work for Yohei Sasagawa, a man who creates money out of thin air by fraudulently claiming it is backed by legendary treasures hidden in Indonesian and Philippine caves. Unfortunately, your European allies and most of the rest of the world no longer believe the stories of Sasagawa and his fellow gangsters and are building an alternative financial system. My question to you is, at what point are you people going to accept reality and agree to renegotiate the international geopolitical and financial architecture to reflect current world demographic and economic reality? My follow-up question was to be, the United States Constitution clearly states that the power to create money belongs to the government of the people of the United States. So at what point is the U.S. military going to keep its oath to protect the Constitution by nationalizing the Federal Reserve Board and freeing the American people from debt slavery? The fact I was denied the opportunity to ask these questions reminded me once again that one of the subtle tactics used by the cabal to control such staged events as press conferences is to make sure only reporters who follow the party line are allowed to ask questions. In any case, listening to the party line as expressed by Blair did provide some important insights into what is happening to the regime in Washington, D.C. and its Japanese slave subsidiary. The most important thing Blair said was that the recent speech to the U.S. Congress and Senate by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was not a pretty sight, and he was trying to meddle in U.S. domestic affairs. Public comments of this nature, especially about Israel, at a corporate press conference constitute very strong language. Blair thus confirmed what this writer's Pentagon and agency sources have been telling him, and that is that their concerted campaign going on to remove both Israel's Netanyahu and the Saudi Arabian regime. The Saudi regime has asked Egypt, Pakistan and other Muslim countries to help it, but all have refused. Pentagon sources are saying that China, Russia and even Netanyahu's own supporters are twisting his arm to try to get him to end the Zionist nightmarish plan to start World War III. The Saudi regime and many members of the Netanyahu regime will be tried as war criminals at the end of all this, the Pentagon sources promise. In addition, they will be forced to pay massive financial compensation, the sources say. So, while the military-industrial complex has now clearly turned its back on the Zionists and the Saudis, it is also clear the current leadership is thinking very small and short-term about the future. Getting back to the world as described by Blair, he does note the best friend the U.S. government now has is Japan, or as he put it, Japan is one of the few countries in sync with the U.S. The U.S. side is pushing Japan to pass laws that will in effect allow the Pentagon to integrate its forces with the Japanese army as the linchpin to their pivot to Asia. Japanese slave Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will visit the U.S. towards the end of this month, where he will read speech to a joint session of Congress that will be carefully prepared by his U.S. and Yakuza handlers. In it, he will try to announce an enhanced U.S.-Japan alliance as a key to a big move to counterbalance China. They will also try to get Abe to announce the final accord on the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership Agreement, TPP. Unfortunately for Abe and his U.S. handlers, the fact that the UK, Germany, France, Italy and Switzerland were among the 50 countries that wanted to join China's proposed Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank means the entire scenario trying to present the puppet Abe as a powerful Asian leader and alternative to China is failing. It is now a fact that the Europeans have publicly renounced U.S. leadership of the world's financial architecture. Abe is just a Japanese Obama, a non-white face for the usual Washington puppet masters, minus the Zionists, to hide behind. The fascist Japanese power brokers like Yohei Sasagawa, and US-based Japan handlers who are behind Abe just do not get that they are facing a paradigm shift and not just business as usual with a few changes. Even if Abe goes to Washington and reads his handler's speech to the puppets gathered there, he is no longer relevant because Washington is no longer the center of the world stage. Another thing to note is that Blair, who we are told represents the cutting edge of the U.S. military-industrial complex, apparently sincerely believes the blatant statistical lies about the U.S. economy being in a recovery instead of being in free fall. Wishful thinking should never be a part of serious intelligence work. Another thing that was learned from watching the public performance of a top military-industrial complex apparatchik was how much they fail to understand how the internet has totally destroyed the old firewall between what they knew and what was released to the public. He seemed to believe public discourse could still be controlled through falsehoods about things like the true state of the economy made to brainwashed corporate reporters when, in fact, the net gives most of the thinking public intelligence briefings as good as or better than what he is getting. One thing Blair did say though that is worth mentioning was that China stole about $300 billion and $200 billion worth of trade secrets respectively from the US and Japan in 2013. What this shows is that the internet is turning into a noosphere or global consciousness where all information is visible and shared. In such a world, the old mentality of trying to control others through propaganda, secret technology and military force is becoming irrelevant. The Chinese already produces 11 times more steel than the US and have pretty much open access to their intellectual property, so, if they wanted to create a giant modern army they could, but they choose not to. In such circumstances it is better to turn them into partners than enemies. To that end, the White Dragon Society last week made a proposal for the governance structure of the proposed World Economic Planning Agency. The proposal calls for giving a 20% voting share to China, 17% each for Europe and North America, 14% for Japan plus Korea, South and North, and 32% for the other countries. This would put East and West on equal terms with 34% of the vote each and give the deciding vote to the South. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank could exist as a separate institution under this proposal, but it should expand its horizons and aim to be the World Infrastructure Investment Bank. In any case, news was rather slow during the last week because of the lull in the secret negotiations on how to update the existing global architecture. The Greek crisis was kicked down the road until May because of this. Things should pick up again towards the end of the month.